Now, financial crime such as bribery and corruption has grown significantly in the last few years. The banking and financial services companies across the globe are in the forefront of the battle against this menace, even as the regulatory regime to tackle financial crime is becoming more complex. For more on what business leaders in this space are devising, we're joined by Marcus McCaffrey from Grant Thornton, UK. Marcus, thanks so much for being with us. Just run us through how India is perceived on account of, transparency, bribery and corruption.
Well, Priya, it's a really interesting question. The Transparency International Index, the Corruption Perceptions Index, ranks India around about 92 to 94 out of about 175 countries. Now, that's clearly not great, but you're certainly not the worst. And I think there has been a large amount of international support for the measures that India has taken recently in outlawing the corruption of Indian officials, which, given the nature of Indian businesses being state-owned in many cases, has to be welcomed.
Right. Marcus, how are foreign investors viewing India in light of several forensic audits at state-owned banks and also the spike in the number of insider trading cases?
Well, again, that's a very interesting question, and it's very expensive. But I think that international investors look very favorably on India because it represents one of the key international markets in the world today. You have a sophisticated, educated workforce, a growing middle class, and a growing technology base, which is the envy of many other nations. I think the problem that India probably has is that traditionally it's been seen as quite corrupt, that the corruption runs through state organs, that there is a culture, an acceptance of bribery that isn't found in many other markets around the world, and that the extraterritorial reach of certain enforcement agencies mean that if you're doing business in India, you really do need, as an international investor, you really do need to manage your risks well in order not to be caught on the other end of a bribery investigation, which may then be enforced by a foreign enforcement agency such as the Department of Justice in the United States, or indeed the UK Serious Fraud Office.
Right. Marcus, the appointment of some top management in large public financial institutions in India has come under scrutiny. Does that put India in poor light, in your opinion? And what's your perspective on hiring or appointing top management and the way it's done, the kind of systems that are in place?
Well, in the United Kingdom, hiring recruitment is very high on the regulator's agenda. And in India, I think it's particularly pertinent. If you have a bank official who is providing commercial loans to counterparties, which may not be at arm's length, to which they are rewritten, points which they could be impaired, then you effectively have a situation where a senior executive of a state-owned bank is providing a loan to a third party, which he may or may not have an interest in, and he is defrauding the Indian taxpayer by allowing that loan to go unpaid and unrepaid. So the hiring process, first of all, needs to ensure that senior executives in banks and people within key positions are not politically exposed, that if they are politically exposed, measures are taken to ensure that they are not going to behave in an unethical manner, and also that when hiring, people are put through a thorough onboarding process, which makes sure they are signing up to ways of behavior, of values and codes of conduct that are consistent with what India wishes to see from its senior executives. So that means that people pledge not to be engaged in bribery, that they pledge not to be involved in fraud, and that they are put through training programs to ensure that they understand not only the reasons why they shouldn't be doing it, but also the net effect that it will have on the bank, their customers and themselves if they do conduct it. So there are a variety of different measures I think that government and banks need to undertake going forward. But absolutely, I think the Indian government does need to focus on the hiring of people, not only at senior executive level, but in key positions.
And what are some of the latest developments with regards to the OECD and G20 when it comes to financial crime? What's catching your eye in terms of some significant developments there?
Well, the OECD and the United Nations, of course, are not enforcement agencies, nor do they draft legislation. What they do is they provide an environment for nations to come together and discuss these issues and maybe have some form of cohesion and consistency between nations in terms of their anti-corruption and anti-fraud regimes. The key issues, I think, probably on the OECD's mind at the moment is one around culture and governance, which I mentioned earlier, which is embedding good culture within government bodies and reflecting that into business. The second one would undoubtedly be encouraging better communications between business and government, and not just creating an enforcement environment where companies have to interpret occasionally, sometimes quite complex legislation, and then when they fall foul of it, be on the other end of an enforcement action. So communication is very important as well. But clearly market abuse has been an issue. We've seen the recent scandals in the UK over LIBOR manipulation, of foreign exchange issues, of precious metals, of the sale of collateralized debt obligations, which were pure junk, and the litigation ensuing from there. Financial crime, bribery and fraud is not contained to one jurisdiction, and I think that the OECD and the United Nations consider that every nation has to put into place proper frameworks to counter it.
All right, Marcus, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us today. That's all we could pack into this edition of Countdown. Do stay tuned. Coming up next, Market Group.